The morning light was soft, filtered through the sheer curtains like a promise of something sacred. My wedding day. The air smelled of roses, white lilies, and the faint sweetness of vanilla from the candles the planner had arranged around the room. I lay there for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter downstairs, bridesmaids getting ready, my father's voice booming in cheerful greeting. I smiled into my pillow, my heart full, my body calm. Today I was supposed to become a wife, to finally step into the life I had dreamed of. I sat up slowly, ran my fingers through my hair, except my fingers didn't find hair. They met smooth skin. My hand froze. For a moment I thought I must still be dreaming. But when I turned toward the mirror, the scream that rose inside me had nowhere to go. My reflection stared back, pale and foreign. My long auburn hair, the hair I'd cared for since I was 12, was gone. Every strand. My scalp was raw, in places uneven and red, like it had been scraped clean in anger. I reached up again, trembling, but there was nothing left to touch. A sound came from the doorway. A low chuckle. I turned sharply. My sister Emily leaned against the doorframe, still in her silk robe, holding her phone up as if filming a movie. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "serves you right." For a second I couldn't speak. The words didn't make sense. What did you do?" Her smile widened, the same cruel curve I'd seen too many times growing up. "Relax, Clara. It's just hair. You'll thank me one day. Maybe now you'll stop acting like you're so perfect." Then, before I could move, another voice filled the room. "What's going on?" My mother Margaret stepped in, still wearing pearls, her hair in its usual perfect blonde waves. She looked at me, then at Emily, and then, to my disbelief, simply sighed. "Clara, honey," she said softly, as though I were a child caught crying over spilled milk. "Don't make a scene. The guests will be here soon." The air left my lungs. "Mom." She shaved my head. "Look at me." Her eyes flicked over me, quick and cold. "It's your wedding day. You can't fall apart now. We'll find a scarf or a hat. Just keep your voice down." Emily burst out laughing. "Oh, Mom, she'll need more than a scarf." She turned her phone toward me again, screen glowing, the faint sound of a video recording still playing. "You should see your face." I lunged forward, grabbing the phone. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. On the screen there I was asleep, breathing evenly, while someone ran electric clippers across my head. A muffled laugh, a whisper. "Now she won't steal the spotlight." My stomach turned. "You filmed it," Emily shrugged. Everyone loves a transformation story. My vision blurred with rage and disbelief. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. But what broke me wasn't Emily's smirk. It was my mother's silence. She just stood there, one manicured hand pressed against the doorframe, her eyes darting toward the window, where white chairs were being arranged on the lawn. "Honey," she murmured again, "please, don't ruin this day." It's already been so stressful. Something inside me fractured. I walked toward the mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable, a stranger wearing my wedding robe, her scalp glinting under the soft light, her eyes burning. I touched the spot where my hair used to fall over my shoulder. 1,000 images flashed through my mind, the late nights brushing it, the compliments from Ethan, my fiancé, how he'd said it made me look like sunlight in human form. My throat tightened. I could barely breathe. Emily's voice sliced through the silence. "Oh, come on. You always needed a reality check, Clara. This is me helping you. Don't you get it? You can't marry Ethan looking like some model from a shampoo commercial. It's pathetic." I turned to her. "You think this is helping?" My voice was steady now, almost frighteningly calm. "You think humiliating me on my wedding day makes you stronger?" Her smile faltered for the first time. "You're so dramatic. It's just enough." I said it quietly, but even she flinched. I took one step forward. "You've been doing this since we were kids. Cutting my prom dress, spreading lies, always hiding behind Mom's excuses." My mother spoke up sharply. Stop it. This is not the time to drag up old grievances. I looked at her, really looked. For the first time I saw not strength but cowardice, the kind that hides behind perfect manners and reputation. You taught her this, I whispered. You taught her she could do anything as long as she smiled afterward. She opened her mouth, but I was already walking past her. My bare feet felt cold against the hardwood. I opened the wardrobe, searching for something, anything that could cover my head. But as I reached for a silk scarf, I froze. Why should I hide? I dropped the scarf back onto the floor. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, where white flowers framed the arch, where I was supposed to say my vows. People were arriving, dressed in bright colors, laughing, unaware that the bride upstairs had been stripped of her crown. I turned back to my mother. You're right, I said. I won't make a scene. Relief flickered across her face. Good. Now let's... But I won't hide either. The words hung in the air like thunder. Emily frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I stepped closer to her, close enough that she finally lowered her phone. It means, I said softly, this day doesn't belong to you. Not anymore. Her eyes darted toward Mom. You can't seriously. I can, I interrupted. And I will. For a long moment none of us spoke. The tension in the room was electric, heavy enough to choke on. Then I walked to the vanity, opened the drawer, and pulled out my makeup kit. My hands stopped trembling. As I traced eyeliner across my lash line, I felt something steady returning, not the calm of ignorance, but the calm that comes before a decision. I dabbed blush on my cheeks, brushed a faint shimmer across my eyelids. My scalp gleamed under the light like polished marble. It didn't look weak, it looked deliberate. Behind me, Emily scoffed. You're seriously going out there like that? I met her eyes in the mirror. You wanted everyone to see what you did. Fine. Let's give them a show. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. My mother's voice wavered. Clara, please, this isn't. This is exactly what it is, I said. It's truth, and I'm done being ashamed of it. The planner knocked on the door, muffled. 10 minutes until guests are seated. Perfect timing, I murmured. I stood up, smoothing the silk of my wedding robe, then slipped into my gown. It was sleeveless ivory, fitted at the waist. The fabric shimmered as I moved. For a heartbeat I imagined my reflection with hair again, but I pushed the thought away. The woman in the mirror didn't need it anymore. When I turned around, Emily had backed toward the door, her confidence cracking. You're insane, I smiled. Maybe. Or maybe you finally met the version of me you can't hurt. Downstairs, the music began, soft piano notes drifting through the walls. My cue. I reached for the bouquet, resting on the dresser, lilies, white roses, and tiny sprigs of lavender. They smelled like peace. I held them tightly, walked past my mother and sister, and opened the door. The hallway was bright sun spilling through the stained glass window at the landing. As I descended the stairs, I could hear whispers, the hum of people, the clinking of glasses, the celebration that wasn't supposed to begin this way. Each step felt heavier but steadier. I didn't know exactly how, but something inside me had already shifted. The humiliation was still there, but beneath it was steel. Outside, the wedding coordinator spotted me and gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Clara, your hair. I met her wide eyes calmly. I know. Let's start anyway. She hesitated, then nodded, awe replacing shock. You look powerful. Maybe I did. As I walked toward the garden doors, the sunlight caught the bare curve of my head, turning it to gold. I could see the reflection of myself in the glass, not broken, not ruined, just stripped down to something true. They wanted me to disappear, I thought. But instead, I'm going to make sure they'll never forget me. I squared my shoulders, exhaled slowly, and whispered under my breath, this day won't belong to them. It'll belong to me. And with that, I opened the doors to face the world. The bathroom smelled faintly of roses and burnt metal. I sat on the edge of the tub, still wearing my gown, trying to steady my breathing. My scalp itched where the skin was raw, and every time I blinked, my reflection in the mirror seemed to mock me, bare, gleaming alien. Somewhere below, laughter floated up from the garden light and careless like nothing had happened. The world kept spinning while mine had cracked clean in two. I pressed my palms against the marble counter. If they think I'll break before my wedding, they don't know me at all. The sound of my own voice startled me. It didn't sound like me anymore. It was lower, colder. From the corner of my eye, I saw something glint near the trash bin, a small piece of silver. I crouched down and found an electric razor, its head still dusted with strands of reddish hair. My hair, there was a faint smear of foundation on the handle, the color my sister used. I turned it over, and a tiny memory card slipped out onto the tile. My heart pounded once hard. I walked to the vanity and pulled out my laptop. When I slotted the card in, the screen blinked to life. The video started in darkness, then showed my sleeping form, the soft rise and fall of my breathing, and a hand moving toward my head. The whir of the clippers filled the room like a swarm of bees. A quiet laugh, then a whisper unmistakable. Now she won't steal the spotlight. For a second, the world went utterly silent. I pressed pause, stared at the frozen frame, my sister's hand gripping the back of my head, the glint of her engagement ring catching the light. My stomach twisted. Then came a knock on the door. "Honey," my mother's voice. Calm, practiced. "You've been up here too long." I unplugged the laptop, slid the card into my palm, and opened the door just wide enough for her face to appear. "Did you know about this?" My voice was almost a whisper. She blinked, the faintest flicker of discomfort passing over her expression. "About what? Don't play dumb, Mom. She filmed it. She shaved my head while I was asleep." My mother's tone softened, but it wasn't kindness, it was control. "Emily was emotional last night. She didn't mean any harm. You know how sisters can be." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Sisters, she assaulted me." Her eyes hardened. "You will not use that word in this house. This is your wedding day. We are not going to let something trivial ruin it." "Trivial," I repeated. "You call this trivial, Clara?" Her voice lowered to a hiss. "You've always been dramatic. If you tell Ethan or anyone else, do you know what this will do to our family's reputation?" I stared at her, realizing what she was really protecting. Not me, not even Emily. Just the image, always the image. "You care more about what strangers think than about your own daughter." She didn't deny it. She just looked past me toward the mirror, as if studying the reflection instead of the real person standing before her. "You'll thank me later for keeping you from embarrassing yourself." "Get out," I said quietly. She frowned. "Excuse me, get out." Her lips parted, but I was already closing the door. I stood there for a long moment, forehead resting against the wood, breathing through the storm inside my chest. Downstairs, a burst of laughter rose, familiar, bright, my sister's voice. I pressed play again on the laptop. Her laughter filled the room, mingled with my soft breathing, the buzz of the clippers. Rage climbed through me, steady and cold. I reached for my phone. The first name I dialed wasn't Ethan's. It was Aunt Rose. She picked up on the third ring. "Clara, I need you," I said. 15 minutes later, there was a soft knock. Rose stepped inside, eyes widening the moment she saw me. "Oh, my God, sweetheart." I handed her the laptop. "Watch." She did. When the video ended, she set the computer down slowly. "That's not a prank, that's assault," I told Mom. "She told me not to make a scene." Rose's jaw tightened. "Of course she did." She took my hands. "You listen to me, Clara. You are not going to hide this. If you want justice, we'll do it the right way." I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until I know how deep this goes." "What do you mean?" I hesitated. "Someone else recorded it. Emily's phone wasn't even in her hand in part of the video. There's another angle." Rose frowned. Who else would? But the sound of footsteps outside the door cut her off. We froze. Emily's voice floated through the crack. "Clara, you decent." Rose squeezed my hand. "Play it calm," she whispered. I opened the door. Emily leaned against the wall, holding a cup of coffee like it was an accessory. Her smile was perfect practiced. So dramatic this morning. You look bold. Rose's voice was ice. Bold. That's what we're calling this now. Emily blinked, pretending to be confused. Oh, hi, Aunt Rose. Didn't see you there. Rose crossed her arms. You need to leave. Emily laughed lightly. Relax, it's just hair. Hair doesn't grow back as fast as trust. Rose shot back. My sister's gaze flicked toward me. You're really going to let her talk to me like that on your wedding day? Shouldn't you be getting ready? Something inside me shifted again. I smiled. Small, deliberate. Oh. I'm getting ready, I said. More than you know. She frowned, sensing something she couldn't name, then shrugged and turned away. Whatever. Try not to cry too much before the ceremony. Puffy eyes don't photograph well. When the door shut behind her, Rose exhaled. She's lost it. No, I said. She's scared. She just doesn't know it yet. Rose studied me for a moment. You're planning something. I met her gaze. If they want to humiliate me, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who they are. Her expression softened. Then let me help. Keep this video safe, I said, sliding her the memory card. If anything happens, show it to Ethan. Rose nodded. You've got my word. When she left, I sat on the bed phone, buzzing in my lap. A message from Ethan, almost there. Can't wait to see you. I typed back, me too. Then hesitated. I wanted to tell him everything, the video, the betrayal, the way my own family had turned into strangers. But not yet. Not like this. I closed my eyes. The doorbell rang downstairs, followed by a chorus of greetings. Guests arriving early. The noise grew louder, glasses clinking, music starting to play. I crossed to the window. The garden below glittered with sunlight, chairs, perfectly aligned white tablecloths rippling in the breeze. My mother moved among the guests, smiling like a politician. Emily trailed behind her, laughter sharp enough to cut glass. From this distance, we could have been any happy family. No one could see the rot beneath the flowers. A knock at the door made me jump. It was my cousin Rachel. Hey, Clara, can I come in? Sure, I said, forcing my voice even. She stepped inside, her smile nervous. You okay? You look different. I almost laughed. That's one way to put it. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. I shouldn't say this, but did you know Emily got fired last month? I blinked. Fired from her marketing job, Rachel nodded. They said it was misuse of funds. Mom said your mother's been trying to keep it quiet. Guess she didn't want people talking. I felt my pulse quicken. So that's what this is about. Control. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? Nothing, I said. Thanks for telling me. She looked uneasy but hugged me quickly before leaving. When the door closed, I stared out at the crowd again. My sister's laughter drifted up faintly through the window. You humiliate me to feel powerful, I thought. You destroy to distract. But power built on cruelty always collapses. A breeze slipped in through the crack in the window, cool and clean. It brushed over my bare scalp, and for the first time I didn't flinch. I looked at my reflection in the glass, no longer a bride who'd been destroyed, but a woman planning her next move. They wanted to take everything from me, I whispered. Instead, they gave me clarity. The sun caught on the edge of the mirror, a thin line of light slicing across my reflection like a promise. I turned from it, straightened my shoulders, and walked to the door. Downstairs, I could hear my mother greeting Ethan, her voice honeyed and false. I felt a calm settle over me, strange and steady. Before I walked down that aisle, I would make sure everyone in that perfect garden knew the truth about who they really were. The dining room shimmered with glass and laughter. Sunlight spilled through the wide French windows, catching on the silverware on champagne flutes on the polished surface of my mother's favorite oak table. From the outside, it could have been any pre-wedding luncheon, polite chatter, family pride, and expensive food, but underneath the perfume and candlelight, I could smell the rot. I sat at the head of the table, the place reserved for the bride, my scalp gleaming under the chandelier, despite the silk scarf loosely knotted around it. Every few minutes, I felt eyes flick toward me and away again, The way people look at a car accident, they don't want to admit they saw. My mother sat opposite posture, perfect smile fixed. "You look radiant, honey," she said softly, her voice brittle with control. "No one will notice a thing." Emily sat 2 seats down, sipping from her mimosa, pretending she wasn't watching me. "We should call it the bold bride look," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, stretching out the word bold until it snapped like elastic. Laughter fluttered around the table, nervous and unsure. I raised my glass and smiled. "To family," I said. "May we always keep things transparent." My Aunt Rose gave me a sharp look across the table, half warning, half pride. My father coughed, the universal sound of a man praying for peace at any cost. He avoided my eyes, focusing on his plate as if mashed potatoes could save him. Across the room, servers brought out plates of roasted salmon and asparagus. The scent made my stomach twist. I forced myself to take a bite, every motion precise, deliberate. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one they'd never forget. Emily leaned back in her chair, her smile sugary. "So, Clara, are you wearing a veil later, or just embracing the minimalism?" My mother shot her a warning look, but Emily kept talking, too pleased with herself to stop. "I mean, it's empowering, right? You don't need hair to look beautiful." I set my fork down gently. "Thank you for your concern, Emily. I'm touched." A murmur of laughter followed, some sympathetic, some uneasy. But I saw it then, the tiniest flicker in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't sure who held the upper hand. A bridesmaid named Kelly, one of Emily's college friends, leaned over to whisper something, but not quietly enough. "So the rumor was true," she said, trying to sound amused. I turned to her. "Which rumor?" Kelly froze. "Oh, nothing. Just something online." My stomach dropped. "Online?" Rose put down her glass. "What's online?" Kelly's face turned crimson. I didn't mean," but it was too late. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The group chat for the bridal party glowed at the top of my screen, dozens of unread messages. And there it was, a link, a video thumbnail. "When jealousy goes bald, LOL." My thumb hovered over it. The preview image was enough. My sleeping face, my sister's hand with the clippers. A rush of blood filled my ears. My pulse roared. Around me the sound of silverware faded, the chatter turned into white noise. Rose leaned closer. "Clara," I swallowed. "Excuse me for a moment." I walked to the doorway and took a long breath. The world outside looked bright, calm, oblivious. When I turned back, Emily was still watching me, one corner of her mouth curved upward, the faintest smirk. I smiled back, slow and sharp. "You really outdid yourself, sis." She blinked, momentarily thrown. "What are you talking about?" I set my phone down on the table between us. The video thumbnail stared up like a loaded gun. "You posted it." She tilted her head, pretending confusion. "Oh, come on, you can't prove that." "I don't have to," I said. "Everyone here already knows." Gasps rippled through the table. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Clara," she hissed, "this is not the time." "It's exactly the time," I said quietly. "Because apparently keeping quiet just makes people bolder." The room froze. Rose stood, resting a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "Sit down, Clara," she murmured. "Not here." I nodded slowly, reclaiming my chair, smile never leaving my lips. "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't want to ruin the mood." The tension snapped for a moment as conversation limped back to life, awkward and shallow. 10 minutes later, the doors opened again. A hush fell as Ethan's mother, Patricia Cole, entered, elegant, poised, the kind of woman my mother always tried to impress. "So sorry we're late," she said, removing her gloves. Traffic was dreadful. Everyone rose to greet her, even my mother, who practically glowed under her attention. "Patricia, so wonderful to see you," she gushed. Patricia's eyes found me almost instantly. She blinked, taking in the scarf, the stiffness in the air. "Sweetheart," she said gently. "Are you all right?" I smiled. "Just a little family drama." Her brows lifted. "Ah, every wedding has it. Some more than others, I murmured. Out of the corner of my eye, Emily shifted in her seat. My mother caught the look, panic flickering in her eyes. Why don't we eat? She said brightly. Patricia, please sit next to me. The servers returned, setting down dessert slices of lemon tart with sugared berries. My mother raised her glass. To Clara and Ethan, may today mark the beginning of something beautiful, to Beauty, Emily said under her breath. What's left of it? I turned my head. What was that? Emily batted her lashes. Just a toast, darling. Rose's chair scraped sharply against the floor as she stood. You have no shame, do you? Sit down, Rose, my mother snapped. You're overreacting. Rose folded her arms. Your younger daughter humiliated your elder, and you call it overreacting, murmurs spread across the table. My mother's cheeks flushed pink. This is our family matter, she said tightly. That's the problem, Rose replied. You always hide behind that word when it's convenient. For a moment, I thought my mother might actually stand up and scream. Instead, she picked up her glass and forced another brittle smile. Enough. Let's just enjoy lunch. The hum of conversation resumed, strained, uneasy. I looked at Rose, who shook her head slightly. Not yet. I forced myself to eat a bite of lemon tart. Sweet, sour, metallic. My phone buzzed in my lap. Another message in the group chat. This is wild. Is she really going through with the wedding, followed by 100 laughing emojis? I felt something click into place inside me. Cold, precise, final. When I looked up, Ethan's mother was watching me again, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet curiosity. You're very composed, she said. I smiled. Composure is inherited. Unfortunately, so is cruelty. Her brows knit together. I see. Don't worry, I added. I won't let it ruin the ceremony. From the far end of the table, my father cleared his throat. Can we please not turn this into a scene? Let's just move forward. I looked at him, tiredness washing over me. You've been saying that my whole life, Dad. Look where it got us. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence was answer enough. A few seats away, one of my cousins whispered something and stifled a laugh. Then another. I heard the faint, tinny sound of a phone playing video. My stomach sank. Turn it off, I said. The whispering stopped. Linda, my cousin, looked up guiltily. Someone sent it to me. I just wanted to see if it was really you. It is, I said evenly. Congratulations, you got your answer. Emily laughed too loud. Oh, come on, it's funny. Don't be such a drama queen. I stood. The chair scraped back sharply, echoing across the room. Is it funny? I asked, watching a woman violated in her sleep. The laughter died. Clara, my mother warned, her voice trembling enough. I looked straight at Emily. You filmed it, didn't you? You shared it. You wanted everyone to see it. Emily stared at me, her smirk faltering. You're overreacting again. God, can't you take a joke? A joke, I repeated slowly. Good to know that's what we're calling cruelty now. Stop, my mother said sharply. We will not do this here. I turned to her. Why not? This is what family looks like, isn't it? A perfect table set for a celebration built on secrets. For a long, terrible moment, no one spoke. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock filled the silence. Then I smiled, calm again. You're right, Mom, I said softly. This isn't the time. The right time is coming. I lifted my glass, the lemon tart untouched before me. To truth, I said. May it find its way to the light. Rose's eyes met mine, a silent question. I gave a small nod. When the meal ended, I excused myself and walked down the hall toward the garden doors. My reflection caught in the glass, the silk scarf slipping slightly, sunlight striking the curve of my scalp beneath. I let the scarf fall to my shoulders. The woman in the reflection stared back, bare, fearless. I didn't look away. They wanted me to hide, I whispered. I think it's time they learned what happens when I don't. Outside, the music for the ceremony began to swell, violins soft and expectant. Guests turned toward the aisle, waiting for the bride. I wasn't just walking toward a wedding anymore. I was walking toward revelation. The world outside shimmered in gold and white. Rows of guests turned toward the garden arch where sunlight spilled across the petals of white roses, arranged in perfect symmetry. The soft hum of violins floated through the air, tender and expectant. But behind the closed doors of the bridal suite, I stood before the mirror, my reflection still, and calm, my heart beating with purpose. The makeup artist hovered nearby, unsure of what to do. "Mrs. Hayes said you wanted to wear the veil early." "No," I said quietly. "There won't be a veil." She blinked. "Oh, would you like me to fix the scarf?" Then I looked at my reflection, at the smooth curve of my bare scalp, at the way the light from the window struck the skin like it was glass. "No scarf," I said. "Just the crown." The artist hesitated, then lifted the crystal crown from its box and placed it carefully on my head. The weight of it was strangely comforting, not like an ornament but like armor. Distantly I could hear my mother's voice downstairs, sharp and commanding. "No one mentions the hair. Do you understand?" Not a word. The ceremony must be perfect. Rose entered quietly through the side door, her face pale. "You're sure about this?" "Yes." "They'll never forget it," she said softly. "Good," I replied. "That's the point." Outside, the coordinator's voice rang through the speakers. "Guests, please take your seats. The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes. My mother burst into the room, flustered, pearls trembling around her neck. "Clara, for heaven's sake, what are you doing? Put something on your head. People will stare." "They should," I said. "Maybe they'll finally see." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're humiliating me." I smiled faintly. "No, Mother. I'm showing them who you are." The color drained from her face. Before she could respond, the door opened again. Ethan stepped inside his tuxedo, crisp, his eyes full of quiet awe and confusion. "Clara," he said. "You look—" He hesitated, then smiled softly. "Different. Beautiful, but what happened?" I met his gaze. "You'll find out soon." He took a step closer, his brows knitting. "Did someone—" "Don't worry," I interrupted. "Everything's under control." I could see the worry flicker across his face, but he nodded, trusting me the way he always did. "Whatever it is," he said, "we'll face it together." I reached for his hand, squeezed it once. "Yes," I said, "together." When he left, my mother let out a breath that sounded more like a curse. "You can't go out there like this," she said. "You'll ruin everything." I turned to her, my voice even. "You ruined everything when you let her do it." Then I walked past her, the crown catching the sunlight as I moved. The music changed, the familiar chords of the wedding march. The double doors opened. A hush rippled through the crowd. For a split second, I almost faltered. The sunlight was blinding, and I could feel 200 eyes lock onto me, confusion blooming across every face. But then the breeze moved through the garden, cool and clean, brushing across my skin, and I remembered why I was doing this. I lifted my chin and stepped forward. Gasps whispered through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Someone else said, "Is that?" I walked slowly, bouquet steady in my hands, every step deliberate. Without the weight of hair, I felt lighter, almost powerful. Ethan stood beneath the arch, his expression softening from surprise to something else entirely. Pride, maybe even awe. As I reached him, he took my hands. "You're stunning," he said quietly. "Thank you," I whispered back. Hold on to that thought. Behind us, my mother's whisper hissed through the air like wind through thorns. "Turn off the cameras." But the DJ, following his usual schedule, had already begun projecting the slideshow on the large screen set up behind the altar, photos of Ethan and me through the years. Except a different video appeared instead. Gasps rose. The soft piano music faltered. The screen flickered once, then showed me asleep, peaceful, and Emily's hand moving across my head, the electric clippers buzzing. The crowd's murmur turned into a low roar. The laughter in the recording echoed through the speakers. Now she won't steal the spotlight. Someone covered their mouth. My Aunt Patricia whispered, "Dear God." Ethan's head snapped toward the screen, then back to me. Clara the first turned facing the crowd, my voice steady. For everyone wondering, yes. That was my sister. The video ended abruptly, frozen on Emily's triumphant smile. The silence that followed was unbearable, thick, electric, the kind that hums against your skin. My mother rushed forward, her heels clicking on the stone path. "Turn that off," she shouted to the DJ. "Now." But it was too late. Everyone had seen. I took the microphone from the stand near the officiant. My hands didn't shake. "I wasn't supposed to tell you," I said, my voice echoing through the speakers. "Because in our family, appearances matter more than truth. My mother told me to keep quiet, to smile because the guests were coming." I turned toward her. Well, here they are. Margaret froze halfway up the aisle, her mouth open, her face pale. "I thought today was supposed to be about love," I continued. "But love doesn't look like humiliation. It doesn't look like silence. It looks like truth." Emily stood near the front row, eyes wide, her face drained of color. "Clara, stop this." "No," I said. "You stop. You've taken enough." She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You're ruining everything." "Everything?" I asked. "You mean the illusion?" Ethan reached for me, his voice low. "Clara, you don't have to." "I do," I said gently. "For once, I do." The crowd sat frozen, no one daring to move. The only sound was the faint buzz of the microphone. "My sister wanted me to disappear," I said, turning back to the guests. "But I'm still here. And I won't hide anymore." Behind me, Rose nodded slightly from her seat, tears glistening in her eyes. My mother tried to speak, but her voice broke. "Clara, please. Think about what you're doing." I said. "I'm telling the truth, something you've avoided your entire life." Emily let out a harsh laugh, desperate and shaking. "Oh, please. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just jealous that you—" "What?" I snapped. "That you finally got caught?" She glared at me. "You'll regret this," maybe I said, "but at least I'll regret it honestly." A ripple of whispers swept through the guests. Someone clapped once, then twice, hesitant, then louder. Rose stood applauding fully. "That's my niece," she said. My mother sank onto a chair, covering her face. Ethan's mother stood beside me, her voice calm but firm. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "No one deserves to be treated that way." I nodded, once my throat tight. Ethan stepped forward, facing the guests. "This ceremony was meant to celebrate love," he said. "And it still can. Real love, not the kind built on lies." He looked at me, eyes steady. "Let's start over, Clara. No family, no facade, just us." I felt the tears rise, but didn't let them fall. "Not today," I whispered. "But soon." He nodded. Emily made a choking sound and bolted up the aisle, tears streaking her face. My mother called after her, but she didn't stop. The crowd parted silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the roses. Then I turned back to the microphone one last time. "If you ever wonder what love should look like," I said, my voice carrying through the stunned air, "it looks like honesty. Even when it hurts." I set the microphone down, gently handed my bouquet to Rose, and walked down the aisle, not toward Ethan, not toward my family, but through the guests, through the open garden gate, out into the sunlight. The breeze lifted the crown on my head, making the crystals sparkle like fire. The violins began again, soft and uncertain, following me until I disappeared beyond the arch. Behind me, the murmurs grew louder, the truth spreading like wildfire. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in my life, the silence that followed wasn't frightening. It was freedom. The silence in the car was thicker than the summer air. Rose sat beside me in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the glow of her phone lighting her worried face. My wedding dress pooled around my feet like a ghost I couldn't shake off. Every time I blinked, flashes of what had just happened replayed behind my eyelids. The gasps, the video. My mother's face paling, Emily's laughter collapsing into panic. Rose finally spoke, her voice soft but edged. "You did what you had to do." I stared through the windshield. "Then why does it feel like I burned down my life?" because sometimes that's the only way to build something new. Outside, the city blurred by in streaks of gold and blue. I'd walked out of the ceremony in front of everyone, no husband, no mother, no family left to stand beside me, but I wasn't sure I'd lost. The weight inside my chest felt both heavy and clean, like a wound that had finally been cut open to drain. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I didn't look at it. Rose reached for it. "It's Ethan." "Let it ring," I said. She nodded and let the phone vibrate until it went silent. A minute later, it started again, this time a message tone. "Want me to read it?" she asked. No. We drove in silence for another few miles until Rose pulled over in front of her townhouse. "You can stay here tonight," she said. No questions, no judgment. I looked at her. "You sure? I've been waiting 30 years for someone in this family to tell the truth," she said. "You did it. That deserves a place to sleep." The house smelled like cinnamon and old books, warm and familiar. She led me upstairs to the guest room and handed me a bathrobe. "Take your time," she said. "I'll make tea." When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The crown still rested on my head, crooked now, the crystals catching stray bits of light. My scalp itched where the razor had grazed it raw. I reached up and slowly removed the crown, placing it on the nightstand. It left a faint red mark across my skin. My phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up. 23 missed calls. Ethan. Mom. Unknown numbers. And then one name that made my breath stop. Emily. The message preview showed only one line: "You've ruined me." I set the phone face down. Downstairs, I could hear Rose moving around in the kitchen, the sound of cups clinking softly. My body ached as if I'd run a marathon. I stripped off the gown and stood in the dim light of the room, the weight of satin slipping from my shoulders. Without it, I felt smaller but lighter, like someone shedding a skin that never fit right. I pulled on the robe, walked downstairs, and sat at the kitchen table. Rose set down 2 mugs of chamomile tea, the steam curling between us. "I saw the news already," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "News?" She turned her phone toward me. There it was, my photo from the ceremony, crown glinting, scalp bare. The headline read, "Bride exposes family betrayal in viral wedding video." "Oh my God," I whispered. "It's everywhere," Rose said. "Someone in the audience must have posted it. The clip already has over 500,000 views." I stared at the screen. There I was, standing under the arch, saying, "Love doesn't look like humiliation. It looks like truth." People in the comments were calling me brave, powerful, unbreakable. Some were cruel, mocking, calling me crazy. But most understood. Rose touched my arm. "You didn't plan this, but maybe it's what needed to happen." I exhaled shakily. "They'll hate me forever. Let them. They built their world on lies, Clara. You just turned on the lights." The tea had gone cold by the time I spoke again. "Do you think Ethan will forgive me for walking out? He loves you," Rose said. "If it's real, he'll understand." But I wasn't so sure. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every shadow looked like a memory. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying, went downstairs, and sat by the window staring out at the dark street. The moonlight caught in the crown on the table beside me. My phone buzzed again. Another message, not from Emily this time, but from a number I didn't recognize. "You think this is over?" I froze. 3 dots appeared, then another message. "You don't get to play the victim." I read it twice before blocking the number. But even after I did, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knew that tone. It was Emily's, even if she'd used another phone. I typed one line and deleted it. Then another. Then I set the phone aside and whispered, "Not tonight." At dawn, I walked out onto the porch wrapped in Rose's quilt. The air was cold, sharp, the kind that wakes you up from the inside. The street was quiet except for a milk truck rumbling past. My mind replayed the moment I'd stood under the arch, hearing my sister's laughter echo from that video. I had thought the rage would burn forever. But now what I felt was something different, emptiness maybe, or clarity. I wasn't the same person who'd woken up that morning, expecting vows and a honeymoon. I wasn't the same woman who'd let her mother's voice dictate what was proper, who'd measured her worth by other people's comfort. That Clara had died somewhere between the razor's hum and the applause. Rose joined me with 2 mugs of coffee, handing me one. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm just thinking about how easy it is to lose everything I said and how freeing it is when you finally stop caring." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like peace to me." I sipped the coffee. "Peace feels strange. You'll get used to it." Before noon, Ethan showed up. I saw his car from the window and felt my chest tighten. Rose squeezed my hand. "You want me to stay?" "No," I said. "I need to do this alone." When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. His tie was loose, his hair a mess. "You disappeared," he said. "I know. I didn't know what to do. My parents, everyone kept asking questions. Reporters showed up at the venue. It's chaos." "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean for it to blow up." He ran a hand through his hair. "Don't apologize for telling the truth. You did what you had to, but you didn't sign up for this," I said softly. He looked at me then, really looked. "I signed up for you." The words broke something open inside me. I stepped forward, but he shook his head slightly. "I just need to understand one thing," he said. "Do you want to keep fighting, or do you want to start over?" I swallowed hard. "Start over, but not today," he nodded. "Then I'll wait." He kissed my forehead, light, respectful, and left without another word. When his car disappeared down the street, I leaned against the doorway, my hands trembling. Rose appeared behind me, silent, handing me my phone. "There's something you should see." It was another message, this time from a reporter. "Emily Hayes declines to comment on the viral wedding scandal. Sources claim she was recently fired from her job." I closed my eyes. The world was punishing her without me lifting a finger. "Karma," Rose said quietly. "Maybe," I replied. "But I'm not celebrating." "You don't have to. Just breathe." I did. That night I packed up what little I had left at my apartment. The dress went into a box. The crown I kept. It wasn't a trophy. It was proof. When I turned off the light, my phone buzzed one last time. Another message from an unknown number again. "You'll regret this." I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "I already did. Now I'm done." And for the first time in years, I believed myself. The sound of rain against the windows was the only thing that kept me company that week. Boston in late August had a way of washing everything clean, even the air. I sat by the window of my new apartment, a small place above a bookstore in Cambridge, watching the drops trace uneven paths down the glass. The city outside looked muted, softer somehow, as if it understood what it meant to start over. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photo on the mantel, me, Rose and Ethan, taken years ago at my father's summer barbecue. I'd almost thrown it out, but Rose convinced me to keep it. "Not every memory has to hurt," she'd said. Maybe she was right. Maybe some things could be rewritten. My phone buzzed beside me. A new email notification from Ethan. The subject line, "Checking in." I opened it, expecting a few careful words, but instead it was a photo, the empty arch from the garden where we were supposed to marry, now draped in ivy and rain. His message beneath was simple: "Even broken things can grow again." I smiled, despite myself, then closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air. For the first time in months, I felt something close to calm. That's when there was a knock on the door. I hesitated, heart stuttering once. No one knew my address except Rose and the landlord. I peeked through the peephole and froze. My father. When I opened the door, he looked smaller than I remembered. His gray hair soaked his raincoat hanging loose. "Hi, Clara." "Dad," I breathed. What are 3 months after the wedding that never was? Boston had settled into the quiet hum of autumn. The air was crisp enough to bite, the kind of air that made every inhale feel like renewal. I'd cut my hair again, short, deliberate this time, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who had been humiliated or the bride who'd walked away. I saw someone calm, someone rebuilding. My mornings had their rhythm now. Coffee at dawn, a walk through the park by the Charles River, and an hour at my drafting table before the city fully woke. The steady scratch of pencil on paper, the smell of cedar shavings, the low hum of traffic outside, all of it stitched me back together piece by piece. People still recognized me sometimes. A few whispered, "You're that bride," as if I were both a cautionary tale and an urban legend. But most smiled kindly. Some even thanked me for speaking up. I learned to nod, to say thank you, to keep walking. Healing, I discovered, wasn't loud. It was made of small, stubborn silences. That morning I came back from my walk to find an envelope waiting at my door. No return address. The paper was heavy cream-colored, almost old-fashioned. I turned it over once, twice before sliding a finger under the seal. Inside was a single photograph. It was of me standing outside my building yesterday. My hair cropped short, my coat buttoned, coffee in hand. The photo had been taken from across the street. Below it, in faint handwriting, "You can't hide forever." The cup slipped from my hand and hit the floor, splashing coffee across the tile. For a long time I just stood there, listening. The building's hallway was empty, the hum of the elevator steady and distant. I picked up the photo, my hands trembling, and turned it over. Nothing. No signature. A chill crawled up my spine. Rose arrived an hour later, bringing croissants from the bakery. The moment she saw my face, she set the bag down. "What happened?" I handed her the photo. She went still. "Is this new? Yesterday?" I said. "Taken near the corner." Rose studied the handwriting. "It's not a stranger. I already knew. It's Emily. Are you sure she used to write like this?" The looped "Why, it's hers." Rose frowned. "You think she's here. I think she wants me to think she is." She looked toward the window, her voice low. "You could go to the police. And tell them what? That my sister's handwriting is haunting me." Rose reached across the table, gripping my wrist. "You're not crazy. And you're not alone." I wanted to believe her. But the familiar pulse of dread had already settled in my chest like an old friend I never wanted back. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the apartment barefoot, the city lights flickering through the blinds, the sound of the river faint in the distance. Every creak of the floorboard made me tense. Every shadow looked like movement. At 1:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Did you miss me?" I didn't reply. I blocked the number, deleted the thread, then sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palms to my eyes. "Not again," I whispered. "Not this time." The next morning I went for my walk earlier than usual. The park was mostly empty except for an old man feeding ducks by the river. When I passed him, he nodded politely. But then, just as I turned onto Beacon Street, I caught a flash of movement across the road, a figure in a hooded coat, standing still watching. My heart jumped. I stopped walking. The figure didn't move. A bus roared past, blocking my view for a moment. When it was gone, the sidewalk was empty. I ran all the way home. When I reached my door, another envelope was waiting. This one contained a newspaper clipping, a story about the viral wedding scandal. Someone had circled a line in red ink. "Emily Hayes declined to comment." Below it, scrawled in the same looping handwriting, "You think silence makes you safe." My knees nearly gave out. That evening, Rose came by again. "You're pale," she said. "Sit down. Eat something." I pushed the envelope across the table. She read it and swore softly. "She's unraveling. She's furious," I said. "She lost her job, her friends, her reputation. And she blames me." Rose nodded slowly. "That may all be true, but fury only lasts so long before it turns into desperation. You have to protect yourself." I exhaled. "She can't hurt me anymore." "Can't she?" Rose asked gently. "She already did once." I stared at the window, at the reflection of my own face in the glass. Not like before. I'm not the same woman she shaved bald to feel powerful. Rose hesitated. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" I shook my head. "No. If she wants to find me, let her. I'm done hiding. But when I was alone again, I locked the door and checked every window twice. The next day, my phone rang while I was sketching designs for a new client. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Clara Hayes, yes. This is Detective Nolan from the Maine State Police. His voice was deep, careful. I believe you're the sister of Emily Hayes. I froze. Yes. I'm sorry to inform you your sister was involved in an accident early this morning. A hit and run outside a motel near Portland. She's alive but in critical condition. The pencil dropped from my hand. What she's been asking for you, he said. You're listed as her emergency contact. I pressed my hand to my mouth. I don't understand. She kept saying your name, Nolan continued. She's conscious but weak. The hospital asked if you could come. I closed my eyes. The photo, the letters, the texts, they all flashed in my mind. Did she say why she was in Maine? No, but she mentioned something about fixing things. Rose arrived within minutes after I called. She listened silently as I repeated what the detective had said. You don't owe her anything, she said. I know, I replied, but I need to see her. Rose frowned. Why, because I need to know if she's still the same person, or if there's anything left worth saving. We drove through the evening, the highway long and gray beneath the fading light. Rose insisted on coming, though I barely spoke during the ride. The trees along the roadside blurred into dark shapes, and the headlights carved tunnels through the mist. At one point she glanced over at me. You're quiet. I keep thinking about the last time I saw her, I said. She was laughing while I cried. And now she's asking for me. Rose didn't respond. The rest of the drive was filled with the sound of tires on wet asphalt. When we reached the hospital, the parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The nurse at the desk looked up. Emily Hayes's room is on the 3rd floor. She's conscious but weak. Please keep it brief. I nodded, following the nurse down a narrow corridor. Each step echoed louder than it should have. My palms were slick. We stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. A sign read Patient Emily Hayes Head Trauma. I hesitated. Go, Rose whispered. You need this. I opened the door. The room was dim, the only light coming from the monitors beside the bed. Emily lay there, her face pale, a line of stitches tracing her temple. Her hair, what little remained, was shaved short for surgery. Her eyes opened slowly. When she saw me, she tried to smile, though it came out twisted and small. So she croaked, tables turned, My throat went dry. I stepped closer, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. Emily. Her hand twitched on the blanket. You came. I wasn't sure I would, I said. Neither was I. She let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. Guess I got what I deserved. I stood at the foot of the bed staring at her. For the first time, she didn't look like a rival or a villain. She just looked human, small, fragile. I didn't know whether to cry or walk out. Instead, I said quietly, maybe Karma just wanted to talk. She laughed again, softer this time, and closed her eyes. I sat down beside the bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The beeping of the monitor filled the silence between us. For the first time since that morning months ago, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be, the woman who wanted justice, or the sister who still remembered loving her. I folded my hands together and whispered, maybe both. The drive to Maine felt longer on the way back. The rain had stopped, but the mist still clung to the trees, the sky that dull gray that looked like it would never clear. I hadn't said a word since leaving the hospital parking lot. Rose didn't press me. She just drove her hands steady on the wheel, the hum of the tires filling the silence between us. Emily was alive, barely. But the words she'd said in that sterile hospital room had burrowed deep into me and wouldn't let go. Mom's the one who sent those letters to you. She said she'd make you pay for humiliating her. When she'd said it, I thought she was delirious, but her eyes had been too clear. Too sure. The image of the envelopes came back, the photograph of me walking home, the circled news article, the line scrawled in red ink. My mother's handwriting disguised, but not enough. I'd spent months convincing myself Emily was still trying to torment me, and all along it had been the woman who'd told me not to make a scene. By the time we crossed the state line back into Massachusetts, I could barely feel my hands. Rose broke the silence first. "You believe her, don't you?" I nodded. "Yes." "Then what are you going to do?" "I don't know," I said, though the truth was already forming like thunder in my chest. "But I can't keep pretending she didn't mean it." Rose gave a small nod, her expression tight. "You're stronger now than you've ever been. Just remember that before you face her again." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to think about facing anyone. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in my apartment made me tense, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock. I sat by the window with a blanket over my knees, staring at the empty street below. In the hospital, Emily had looked so small, her hair shaved away, her voice faint. The irony hadn't escaped either of us, both of us stripped bare in different ways because of the same woman. When the sun finally came up, I made coffee and opened my notebook. Pages and pages of sketches for my new projects stared back at me, curves of light, patterns of glass and space, healing spaces. I'd been building sanctuaries for other people without realizing I needed one myself. A knock came at the door around noon. I hesitated before opening it. Ethan stood there, damp from the drizzle outside, holding a paper bag of takeout. "You're hard to track down," he said softly. I stepped aside to let him in. I needed quiet. "I heard about Emily," he said. "Rose called me." I nodded. "She'll live." He studied me for a moment, then set the food on the counter. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. Because of her. Because of Mom." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What about her?" I told him everything about the envelopes, the handwriting, the confession. He didn't interrupt, not even once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "So it was your mother all along?" "Yes." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to confront her," I said. He didn't try to stop me. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," I said quickly. "This is mine." Ethan stepped closer, eyes gentle. "You don't have to do everything alone." "I do this one alone," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "If I bring you, she'll twist it. She always does. I need her to see me, not through anyone else." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then promise me one thing, don't let her pull you down to her level." I gave a small, tired smile. I think I finally learned how not to. After he left, I packed a small bag, just my keys, my phone, and the envelope with the photograph inside. It felt like carrying proof of something sacred, something poisonous. The drive to my mother's house took less than an hour, though it felt like crossing decades. Every mile closer made my stomach tighten. By the time I turned down the old street, I could already see the house's familiar shape through the thinning trees. Nothing had changed. The white shutters, the roses climbing up the porch rails. The air smelled the same, lavender and lemon polish. For a moment, I almost turned back. But then I remembered Emily's voice in the hospital. She said she'd make you pay. I rang the bell. Footsteps approached, then the door opened. My mother stood there in her pearl earrings and cashmere sweater, her expression unreadable. "Clara," she said. "You came." "I did. Come in." I stepped over the threshold. The air inside was too warm, too perfumed. The house looked frozen in time, every photo frame gleaming, every cushion fluffed. It was exactly as it had always been. She gestured toward the sofa. "Tea, no." Her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Then say what you came to say." I pulled the envelope from my coat and set it on the coffee table. "I know it was you." Her eyes flicked toward it. "What is that?" "The letters," I said. "The photo. The ones meant to scare me." Her mouth tightened. "You have no proof." "I have your handwriting," I said. "You never could disguise it. The loops, the slant. I know your hand better than anyone." For a second, something flickered behind her eyes, something like guilt or rage or both. Then she smiled faintly. "You embarrassed this family. I just wanted you to remember what you'd done." "What I'd done?" I said quietly. "You mean standing up for myself? You humiliated us." She snapped, her composure cracking. "You made a spectacle out of our name. Everything I built gone because you couldn't control yourself for one day." I felt something inside me settle. "You always cared more about the name than the people wearing it. You don't understand," she said sharply. "When you're a mother, you do what you must." "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "You tried to ruin me. You manipulated Emily. You turned your own daughters into weapons." "Stop," she hissed, standing up. "Don't twist my love into love." The word came out like a laugh. "You wouldn't recognize love if it stood in front of you and begged to be seen." She stared at me, breathing hard. For a moment the mask slipped completely, and I saw the fear underneath, the fragility she'd hidden behind control. "I only wanted you to be strong," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "You wanted me to be obedient." We stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, she sank back into her chair, the fight leaving her posture. "So what now? You came here for revenge?" "No," I said. "For closure." She looked up surprised. "You think this gives you peace?" "No," I said again. "But it gives me distance. And that's enough." I took a step toward the door, but paused. "You told me once not to make a scene. You should have listened to your own advice." Her mouth opened, but I was already gone. Outside, the air hit me like cold water. The leaves had begun to fall, covering the driveway in flashes of orange and gold. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. Then I pulled the envelope from my coat one last time and tore it in half. The paper fluttered away in the wind, scattering like ashes. In the distance, the church bells of the town square began to ring slow and steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small when I heard them. I walked back to my car, opened the door, and looked up at the sky. The clouds were finally breaking apart, sunlight spilling through in thin streaks. I started the engine, but before pulling away, I whispered into the stillness, "You can't hurt me anymore." The wind carried the words soft and final through the open window. And for the first time since that morning when I woke up bald, I felt free enough to believe them. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had started to peel near the windows, and the roses she used to brag about were tangled and dying along the gate. I parked on the street engine, idling my hands, gripping the steering wheel. For 30 years, that house had been my cage and my stage, where I learned how to stay quiet, how to smile through pain, how to apologize for existing too loudly. Now it was just an address. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air smelled faintly of rain and decay. My heels clicked against the old stone walkway, the same one she used to make me scrub before guests arrived. As I reached the porch, I saw her silhouette through the glass, sitting upright, hands folded, waiting like a queen, expecting her subject. When she opened the door, she looked smaller too. Still composed, still polished, but there was something brittle in her eyes. "Clara," she said softly. "You look tired." "I'm not," I said. "Just done. Come in." I crossed the threshold and the familiar scent hit me, lavender-polished lemon cleaner, a hint of something sterile. The furniture hadn't moved an inch since the last time I was here. It was like she'd kept everything frozen so the world couldn't change without her permission. She gestured toward the sofa. "Tino." Her lips tightened. "Still dramatic, I see. Still pretending everything's fine, I see." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly between us, marking time neither of us could get back. Finally, she said, "I didn't think you'd come." "Then, why invite me? I thought maybe you'd realized what this circus has cost all of us." "All of us?" I repeated. "You mean you?" Her voice sharpened. "Don't start." "I'm not starting," I said. "You started this the moment you told Emily to teach me humility." Her eyes flicked to me, cold and startled. "She told you that?" "Yes. That girl always did exaggerate." "So she's lying?" I asked. My mother smoothed the fabric of her skirt, her rings flashing in the lamplight. "I told her to talk to you, to help you remember your place." "My place?" I stepped closer. "And where is that exactly? Beneath you? Beneath your reputation? You don't understand what it takes to maintain a family's name. I understand perfectly, I said. It takes sacrificing your daughters so the neighbors think you're respectable. Her nostrils flared. Watch your tone. I've watched it my whole life, I snapped. And where did that get me bald on my wedding day while you told me not to make a scene? Her voice broke into a whisper. You humiliated us. I told the truth. You ruined everything I built. No, I said quietly. You built a lie. I just refused to live inside it. For a heartbeat, the room went completely still. The clock stopped, sounding like time. It sounded like counting down. She turned away, walking to the cabinet where she kept her glass figurines. You think you're so righteous, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. You think standing up there airing our shame for strangers made you powerful. It made you pitiful. I laughed softly. You really believe that, don't you? She spun toward me. I believe you've mistaken defiance for strength, and you've mistaken control for love. Her hand shook as she set a glass swan back on the shelf. I did everything I did to keep this family together. By destroying us one by one, her eyes flashed. By keeping you safe from what? From yourself, she said, voice rising. You've always been reckless, emotional. You needed guidance. Guidance. My throat tightened. You told me not to cry at Dad's funeral because the neighbors were watching. You told me love was weakness. You told me silence was dignity. You didn't guide me, you erased me. Her face twisted, and for the first time I saw it, the flicker of guilt, the fear that she was losing the last thread of control. Get out, she said. No, I said calmly. Not until you hear me. I don't want to hear you, she screamed. You've said enough, I took a breath. I used to think if I could make you proud, you'd finally love me. But you don't love anyone. You only love reflection, whatever shines back on you. Her shoulders sagged. You're wrong. Then, prove it, I said. Say you're sorry. She blinked. What, say it? For me. For Emily. For every time you called cruelty a lesson. She looked at me, her mouth opening, but no sound came. Then she sank into the chair beside the fireplace, her hand trembling as she pressed it to her forehead. I did what I thought was right, she whispered. I didn't want you to make the same mistakes I did. What mistakes, I asked? Loving the wrong people, trusting the wrong ones, or being too proud to admit when you were wrong. She didn't answer. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but they never fell. You can't rewrite what you did, I said. But you can stop pretending it was love. Her voice was a whisper now. You hate me. I shook my head. No, I stopped hating you the moment I understood you. She looked up. What do you mean, I see you now, I said softly. All the fear, the control, the emptiness. You raised me to be you, but I chose to be me instead. She pressed her lips together, and for the first time in my life, she didn't have an answer. I walked to the mantel and picked up the old family photograph, the four of us at the lake, my father's arm around her, Emily clinging to my waist. I slipped the photo from its frame, tore away the part that held her face, and set the rest back under the glass. Her breath caught. What are you doing? I'm not erasing you, I said. I'm just stopping you from owning everything. I placed the frame gently back on the mantel and turned toward the door. You'll regret this, she said weakly. I already did, I replied. Now I'm done. When I opened the door, cool air rushed in, fluttering the curtains. She stayed seated, small and rigid, her shadow trembling on the wall behind her. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. The evening light was fading, the sky streaked in gold and rose. For a moment I thought I heard her crying. Then the sound faded into the rustle of leaves. Rose was waiting in the car. Well, she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. It's over, I said. She glanced at me. You look lighter. I am. As we drove away, I looked out the window at the house one last time. The windows glowed softly against the dusk. Behind one of them, my mother sat perfectly still, framed by the same curtains that had always hidden her life from the world. She'll never change, Rose murmured. Maybe not, I said. But I did. When we reached the highway, The sky opened wider, the colors deepening into violet. I rested my forehead against the glass and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel like a runaway daughter or a broken bride. I felt like a survivor stepping into her own story. And when Rose reached over and took my hand, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The road ahead was long, dark, endless. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Spring arrived like a whisper, soft and cautious, as if afraid to wake the ghosts that winter had left behind. The snow along the Charles River melted into silver ribbons and tulips, pushed their way through the soil outside my apartment. For the first time in years, I opened all the windows and let the light flood in. It smelled like new beginnings. I'd moved out of the old apartment a month earlier into a smaller one on a quiet street in Cambridge. The place had wide windows, worn wooden floors, and enough space for a drafting table. On the door in fresh gold lettering it said, "Revive Studio Healing Through Design." It was mine, every inch of it. The first few weeks were chaos, permits, paint sleepless nights, but it was the kind of chaos that felt alive. I'd started with one client, a women's wellness center that wanted calm, restorative interiors. Then word spread. By April, I had 6 projects and a waiting list. On mornings when I walked to the studio, the river glittered beside me like it was rooting for me. Some days people still recognized me as that bride, and I'd smile politely and keep walking. They didn't know that the woman from the headlines no longer existed. Healing wasn't glamorous. It was quiet persistence, learning how to take joy without guilt, how to rest without feeling like surrender. One afternoon I was sketching lighting fixtures when the bell above the studio door chimed. I looked up and froze. Ethan stood there holding a bouquet of white tulips. "You still like these?" he asked. I smiled. "I still do." He stepped closer, eyes sweeping over the space. "It's beautiful, Clara. You built this from nothing." "Not from nothing," I said. "From ashes." He gave a small, proud smile. "You look happy." "I am, most days." He nodded. "That's enough." We stood there for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Then he set the flowers on the counter. "I'm not here to talk about the past," he said, "but I wanted you to know I bought a place here, in Boston. Thought I'd stop running too." The words hung in the air like sunlight through glass. "That's good," I said softly. He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "Do you think we could have coffee sometime? No labels, no expectations. Just 2 people who survived the same storm." I hesitated. "Maybe. One day," he smiled. "Then one day it is." After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching him walk down the street. It felt strange, seeing him as part of the world again, not just a memory frozen in pain. When I turned back, I noticed the bouquet. A small note was tucked between the stems. In his familiar handwriting, "You deserve the sunlight." I pressed it between the pages of my sketchbook. The next week, Rose came by with a letter. "It's from your father," she said. My chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation with my mother. I opened the envelope carefully. His handwriting was shaky but still neat. "Clara, I've moved out. Your mother and I are living apart now. I see how much I let silence become my shield. You were right. Silence isn't peace. It's surrender. Thank you for teaching me that. I'm proud of you, Dad." I read it twice, tears blurring the words. "He means it," Rose said quietly. "He's changing." I nodded, my voice thick. "I hope he finds peace too." Later that evening, while I was closing the studio, a delivery driver brought a small box. No name, no address, just a single word on the tag, Maine. Inside was a folded note and a silver hair clip. "Dear Clara, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm in therapy now. They say admitting what you did is the first step to healing. You were right, Mom taught us to hide pain until it rotted. I'm trying to stop hiding. Thank you for not hating me even when you should have. Emily." The breath caught in my throat. The hair clip was the same one I'd given her when we were teenagers, engraved with her initials. For a long time, I just sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was something close to hope. The following week, the Daily Chronicle contacted me for an interview. I almost said no. But then, the editor's message caught my eye. "We'd like to feature your design work, your journey, not your scandal." I said yes. On the day of the interview, the journalist, a kind woman in her 60s, asked, "Do you ever regret what you did that day?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said, "because if I hadn't spoken, I'd still be living in silence. Revenge got me noticed, but healing kept me whole." She smiled. "That's a good line. It's the truth," I said. The article came out 2 days later, From Broken Bride to Builder of Hope. It wasn't just about my business, it was about resilience, about how pain can be turned into something that shelters others. The response was overwhelming. Women wrote from all over the country, sharing their stories of family betrayal and survival. I read every message. Some of them broke me open. Others reminded me why I'd chosen to rebuild. That night, I placed the old crystal crown on a shelf in the studio. Below it, a brass plaque read proof of survival, not status. Every morning since sunlight has struck it first. A few weeks later, Rose came by again with coffee. "You know," she said, settling into a chair, "you're helping people now, whether you mean to or not." "I hope so." She smiled. "You already are. That's what legacy looks like." I looked around the studio, the soft colors, the calm light, the sketches pinned to the walls. Maybe legacy isn't something you build. Maybe it's what grows from what you refuse to let destroy you. Rose nodded, eyes shining. "Your mother called me last week." I stiffened. "What did she want?" "She's in counseling." "Your father insisted." "She asked how you were." I hesitated. "What did you tell her, that you're finally living?" I smiled faintly. "Good answer." The bell above the door chimed then, and a young woman stepped inside. Her hair was buzzed short, her eyes nervous. "Hi," she said. "I read your article. I'm starting over." "I wondered if you're hiring." I exchanged a glance with Rose and smiled. "Maybe I am." When she left, Rose leaned back in her chair. "The universe has a sense of humor." "Or mercy," I said. That evening after closing, I walked to the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the air smelled like spring rain. I thought of everything: the girl I'd been, the mother who'd broken me, the sister who'd hurt me, the silence I'd finally stopped carrying. For a long time, I just stood there watching the current. Then I whispered thank you to no one and everyone. The water rippled soft and endless, carrying the sound away. When I turned back toward home, the street lamps lit the path in warm golden pools of light. I didn't hurry. I didn't hide. For the first time, I felt like I was walking into a life that was entirely mine. The morning began like any other. Coffee brewing, the sound of paper rustling as I reviewed sketches spread across my desk. Outside the window, Boston moved in its usual rhythm, buses sighing to a stop, joggers along the river, the world spinning, as if peace could last forever. I almost believed it could. Until my phone vibrated. At first I ignored it, thinking it was another client email. But when I glanced down, the headline flashing across the screen made my blood run cold. Ex-bride turned advocate exposed for lying. About family abuse. My throat closed. Beneath it was a smaller line. Anonymous source claims Clara Hayes fabricated details of her viral wedding scandal for fame. I sank into my chair. For a long moment, all I could hear was the faint tick of the clock. No one else was in the studio, but suddenly it felt crowded. Memories, doubts, ghosts. I opened the article. The words were acid. According to a close relative, Clara exaggerated the events of her wedding day to gain public sympathy and secure media attention. A close relative. I didn't need to guess who. The phone started buzzing again, notifications piling up, clients texting, reporters requesting comments. I turned it face down and pressed my hands against my temples. Rose burst, and 20 minutes later, her face flushed. "I saw the headline," she said, breathless. "Tell me you're not answering them." "I haven't said a word," I replied. "Good. Don't. They feed on reaction. It's Emily, I said quietly. It has to be. Rose's mouth tightened. Of course it is. She's still trying to claw her way out of the hole she dug. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Looks like she's dragging me down with her. Rose crossed her arms. You can sue her for defamation. I could, I said, staring at the muted phone, but I don't want to fight her again. I just wanted peace. Rose sighed. Peace doesn't mean silence, Clara. You know that better than anyone. I looked up at her. So what do I do? Tell the truth again, she said simply. But the truth already felt tainted. By noon, the story had spread across social media. Comment sections overflowed with strangers' opinions. Some defended me. She has no reason to lie, but others tore me apart. Another attention seeker playing victim. I locked my office door and paced. I'd rebuilt everything from the rubble of that day, and now it was all trembling again like glass ready to crack. A knock startled me. Ethan stood on the other side of the glass door holding 2 coffees. I let him in, not trusting my voice. He handed me a cup. I read it. Of course you did, I muttered. He studied me for a moment. You okay? I don't know, I said. Every time I start to feel safe, something drags me back. It's what happens when people can't stand to see you move on, he said gently. They throw stones and call it truth. I sat down. She sent the letters. Now this. I thought she was trying to change. People relapse, Ethan said quietly. Even into cruelty. I stared out the window. I don't want to go back to war. Then don't, he said. Don't give her the satisfaction. Let your work speak louder. But the calm I'd built was cracking. That evening, while sorting through emails, I received a message from an unknown sender. You should stop pretending to be a saint. The truth always finds its way out. I deleted it immediately, but my hands shook so badly I spilled my tea. Rose called at midnight. Don't read the comments, she warned. Too late, I said. There was a pause. Clara, remember what we talked about. Healing doesn't mean the world will never test you. It means you know how to survive the test. I wanted to believe her. The next morning, a message popped up from a volunteer at the Haven shelter. You should see this. Attached was a screenshot of a chat thread. Emily's name was right there. She was offering exclusive insight about me to a gossip blogger for money. My breath caught. It wasn't even subtle. Her message read, If I tell you my side, will you pay me? The truth deserves to be told. I sat back in my chair, the screenshot glowing on my screen. Anger burned for a moment, then fizzled out. I wasn't surprised anymore, just tired. When I showed Rose, she slammed her hand on the desk. You have proof now. Take it to the press, I shook my head. No, I'm done playing her game. You're just going to let this continue. I'm going to tell my story once. Then, I'm walking away. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote. Not a rebuttal, not an accusation, just truth. A year ago, I chose to speak when others told me to stay silent. That choice cost me, but it also saved me. I've learned that forgiveness isn't the same as trust, and silence isn't the same as peace. Some people mistake healing for weakness, but it's the hardest kind of strength there is. I stand by every word I ever said, because it was mine. And I'll keep building from it no matter who tries to tear it down. I posted it. Within an hour, it spread. Thousands of comments, messages of support. Strangers wrote that they'd felt the same, betrayed, gaslighted, silenced. Others shared their own stories of surviving toxic families. For the first time since the headline, I felt the weight lift. The next day, the narrative shifted. A blogger released screenshots proving Emily had fabricated the new allegations. Source exposed for lying to media, the title read. The screenshots were brutal, Emily begging for payment, admitting she'd needed attention again. By noon, public sympathy had flipped. The same people who doubted me were now condemning her. The news outlets quietly deleted their stories, replacing them with retractions. Rose came by waving her phone. You've been vindicated, she said. I looked at her. That's not what I wanted, she softened. I know, but it's still justice. I nodded slowly. Justice feels quieter than I thought. Later that night, as I locked up the studio, my phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. I'm sorry. Just 2 words. I stared at them for a long time before replying with a single emoji, a tulip. She'd know what it meant. Growth. Letting go. I turned off my phone. The following week, I was invited to speak at a local women's conference about resilience. I almost said no, but Rose insisted. Your voice is what people need now, she said. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, I realized how far I'd come. My story isn't about revenge, I said into the microphone. It's about reclaiming truth. We can't control how others treat us, but we can control how we respond. I used to think strength meant fighting back. Now I know it means knowing when not to. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was warm, steady, human. The kind of sound that fills a room without breaking it. Afterward, a young woman with tearful eyes came up to me. I left a toxic home last month, she said. I didn't think I could start over until I read about you. I took her hands. You already started, I told her. Every time you choose yourself, you start again. That night, as I walked home, the city felt different. The wind was sharp, but it didn't sting. I passed a newsstand, still displaying an old photo of me, bald head, shining under sunlight. Eyes fierce. I stopped, smiled, and whispered, You did it. Then I kept walking, my reflection fading in the glass as the lights of Boston flickered on around me. I didn't need everyone to believe my truth anymore. It was enough that I did. A year later, I woke to the sound of birds outside my window and the sunlight spilling across the floor like liquid gold. For a second, I didn't recognize the feeling in my chest. It wasn't dread. It wasn't survival. It was peace, quiet and unassuming but real. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Rose was already there, sitting at the counter, reading the morning paper. She'd moved into the guest house behind my property last fall, claiming I needed someone to make sure I didn't forget to eat breakfast. You ready for today? She asked, glancing up with that knowing smile. As ready as I'll ever be. The article she folded shut had my name in the headline again, but this time it wasn't scandal or survival. It was celebration. Architect opens the Haven Shelter, a safe space for women rebuilding their lives. I'd been dreaming of this day for months. Every blueprint, every late night of planning, every hour of doubt, it all led here. The shelter was built on an old piece of land my father had transferred to me. The same house where I'd once stood trembling face to face with the ghosts of my family. Now, it was something else. A place where pain could turn into possibility. By 10, the parking lot outside was full. Volunteers, journalists, and local families gathered beneath the white banner that read, The Haven, a place to begin again. When I stepped up to the microphone, the wind caught the edge of my hair, brushing it across my cheek. For a brief moment, I saw flashes of the woman I used to be the broken bride, the humiliated daughter, the silenced child. But she wasn't gone. She was the foundation beneath everything I'd built. Thank you all for coming, I began. My voice wavered at first, then steadied. This place exists because I once believed healing was impossible. I thought silence kept me safe. I thought love meant forgiveness without accountability. I was wrong. The crowd was silent, attentive. I looked around and saw faces. I knew Ethan standing near the back, my father in a gray suit beside him, and Rose smiling proudly from the front row. Pain doesn't vanish when you name it, I continued. But naming it is how you start to live again. This building isn't about forgetting the past. It's about turning it into light for someone else's path. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind of sound that said we understand. After the ceremony, people drifted through the shelter's halls, admiring the calm colors, the open windows, the art room where women could paint or write or simply breathe. The sunlight spilled over polished wood and fresh lavender blooms on each table. My father approached quietly. It's beautiful, he said. Thank you, I replied. He hesitated, his gaze flickering between pride and regret. I wish your mother could see it. I looked out the window. Maybe she will. In time. He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. He'd started therapy, and our relationship had settled into something gentle and real. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We talked about next steps. Later, as I was greeting guests, a volunteer handed me a small envelope. "Someone dropped this off earlier," she said. There was no return address, just my name in delicate handwriting. I knew it instantly. Emily. Inside was a short note and a photo. "Clara, they say healing isn't linear. Some days I still hate myself for what I did. But then I see what you've created, and I realize you turned all that darkness into something good. Thank you for letting me try again. I'm working at a shelter in Maine now. Maybe one day I'll earn the right to visit yours. E." I stared at the picture tucked behind the note. It was of Emily, standing in front of a seaside shelter, smiling hair, cropped short sun in her eyes. A strange warmth filled my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but something close. Understanding. Rose appeared beside me, reading over my shoulder. "She looks human." "She is," I said softly. "She always was, just lost." Rose placed a hand on my arm. "So were you. Look how that turned out." By evening, most of the guests had gone. The sun dipped low, painting the building in soft gold. I walked alone through the quiet halls. The room smelled faintly of paint and jasmine. I paused at the main entrance where a plaque gleamed under the light, dedicated to all who were told to be silent and chose to speak anyway. Outside, Ethan waited by the gate. "Thought you could use a ride home," he said. I smiled. "You just wanted to see if I'd finally slow down." "Maybe both," he said. As we drove, the road unwound through fields of green. The air was cool, the windows rolled down. For a long time we didn't speak. It was the kind of silence that felt easy. Finally he said, "Do you ever think about that day, the wedding?" I took a breath. "Sometimes. But not with anger anymore. More like gratitude. It gave me back my life." He glanced at me. "You really believe that I do?" I said. "Pain changes us, but it doesn't get to define us." He nodded, then smiled faintly. "I'm glad I got to see who you became." We reached my house just as dusk turned to night. The porch light glowed softly, the wind chimes whispering in the breeze. "Come in for tea?" I asked. He hesitated, then smiled. "1 cup." Inside, I poured tea while he wandered to the shelf where the crystal crown rested under glass. "You kept it," he said. "It's a reminder," I said, "of what that surviving isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about walking through it and coming out whole." He studied me for a long moment. "You really did." Later, after he left, I sat alone on the porch. The air was cool, the stars just beginning to bloom above the trees. Somewhere down the street, laughter floated from a neighbor's yard. I thought of everything: the betrayal, the courtroom visits, the therapy sessions, the nights I'd cried until morning. All of it had led here to this quiet evening, to a peace I hadn't known was possible. I took out my phone and opened the page for the Haven shelter. Messages had already started coming in, women thanking me, sharing stories of strength and survival. I typed one final post. If you've ever had to stand up to family or rebuild yourself after betrayal, you know what real strength feels like. It's not revenge, it's rising. Tell me, what moment made you realize your peace mattered more than approval? Share it below. Maybe your story will help someone else find their voice. And if this journey touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for more stories where justice finds its way home. When I hit post, I set the phone down and looked out into the night. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and rain. Somewhere a train horn sounded in the distance. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I felt connected to it, like the pain had been repurposed into something living, breathing good. The stars above shimmered like 1,000 tiny forgivenesses, each one earned, not given. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. We made it, and this time there was no echo, only the soft hum of peace answering back.